Hey everyone, welcome to Horror Storyteller. A routine work trip to rural Kentucky takes a terrifying turn. Ethan Hayes, a corporate fixer, finds himself facing something far more disturbing than underperforming branches. Get ready for a chilling creepypasta about isolation, fear, and the things that lurk in the shadows. My name is Ethan Hayes, and I'm what you might call a fixer in the corporate world. Not the kind who deals with shady backroom deals or makes problems disappear in the dead of night. No, my fixing is far more mundane, though sometimes just as messy. I'm a project manager, specializing in turning around, let's call them underperforming, branches of mid-sized companies. When a regional office is bleeding money, morale is in the toilet, and the higher-ups are starting to sweat, that's when they send in guys like me. I parachute in, assess the damage, streamline operations, crack the whip a little, and hopefully, in a few months, leave behind a lean, mean, profit-generating machine. Or at least, something that isn't actively hemorrhaging cash. Usually, these assignments are in places like Scranton, Pennsylvania, or maybe a struggling office park in suburban Ohio. Places that are, well, normal, predictably boring. That's why when I got the call about the Covington, Kentucky branch of AgriCorp Solutions, I didn't think much of it. AgriCorp Solutions, as the name suggests, dealt with agricultural supplies and consulting. Covington was a regional hub, supposedly, for their operations in the rural parts of Kentucky. Seemed straightforward enough. Fly in, stay in some cookie-cut hotel, fix a spreadsheets, fly out. Easy peasy. Famous last words, right? The first sign that Covington wasn't going to be your typical turnaround project was the drive from Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport to CVG. I'd rented a sensible, silver sedan, something anonymous and professional. The GPS, bless its digital heart, directed me not towards the bustling city of Covington itself, but south, deep into what I quickly realized was, well, the rural part of Kentucky. The interstate gave way to state roads, then to county roads, and finally to what felt like glorified farm tracks. The landscape shifted from neatly manicured suburban sprawl to rolling hills, thick forests, and fields that stretched out like rumpled green carpets. It was picturesque, in a way, if you ignored the unsettling feeling that crept up your spine the further you drove from civilization. The air changed too. The crisp, slightly metallic tang of city air was replaced by something heavier, thicker. It smelled earthy, like damp soil and decaying leaves, but with an undercurrent of something else. Something sweet, almost cloying. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, but it was different, and in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up a little. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and angry orange. Shadows lengthened, twisting familiar shapes into something vaguely menacing. The trees lining the narrow roads seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching across the asphalt. I turned up the radio, hoping for some classic rock to blast away the growing unease, but the signal kept cutting in and out, spitting static and snippets of country music I didn't recognize. Music that sounded old, like it was being played on a record player in a dusty attic. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I arrived at Covington AgriCorp Solutions, or rather, what the GPS insisted was Covington AgriCorp Solutions. It wasn't an office park. It wasn't even really in a town. It was out here, in the middle of nowhere. The office was a low, sprawling building that looked like it had once been a barn or some kind of agricultural processing plant. It was made of weathered wood, painted a faded, sickly green that was peeling in strips. A rusted metal sign, barely legible, proclaimed AgriCorp Solutions Covington branch. The parking lot was gravel, mostly empty, with a few dusty pickup trucks scattered around. The whole place had an air of abandonment, like it had been forgotten, left to slowly decay in the Kentucky countryside. I parked the silver sedan, feeling ridiculously out of place, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. No traffic hum, no distant sirens, no city noises at all. Just silence, and the rustling of leaves in the wind, and something else. A low, rhythmic thrumming that I could feel more than hear. It vibrated in my chest, a subtle, unsettling pulse. I got out of the car, stretching my stiff limbs, and took a deep breath. The earthy, sweet smell was stronger here, almost overpowering, and now, mixed with it, was another scent. Faint, but definitely there. Something metallic, like blood or rust. I couldn't quite place it, but it made my stomach clench. The front door of the building was heavy wooden and looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I tried the handle and surprisingly it turned. With a groan of protesting hinges, the door swung inwards, revealing darkness. Not just dimness, but absolute, impenetrable darkness, like stepping into a cave at midnight. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a small reception area. Dust motes danced in the light, thick as snowflakes in a blizzard. The air inside was stale, heavy, and cold. Colder than it should have been for late summer in Kentucky. There was a reception desk, made of the same weathered wood as the building exterior, covered in a thick layer of dust. Behind it, a corkboard was plastered with faded notices and yellowed flyers. A calendar, still stuck on March, hung crookedly on the wall. Everything felt frozen in time. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the stillness. "Is anyone here?" Silence. Only the faint thrumming and the whisper of the wind outside. I stepped further into the reception area, my shoes crunching on something gritty underfoot. More dust, probably, or something else. I didn't want to look too closely. To my left, a hallway stretched into the darkness, disappearing around a corner. To my right, a closed door, also wooden and heavy, with a brass plaque that read Branch Manager Mr. Abernathy. I hesitated for a moment, unsure which way to go. Common sense suggested finding the manager's office first. I knocked on the door, a sharp rap that seemed to echo too loudly in the silence. "Mr. Abernathy, it's Ethan Hayes. From corporate." No answer, listening but heard nothing, just the thrumming and the wind and the unsettling silence of the building itself. I knocked again, louder this time. "Mr. Abernathy." "Hello." Just silence. A silence that felt thick, oppressive, a silence that seemed to press in on me, making it hard to breathe. Slowly, cautiously, I reached for the doorknob. It was cold, clammy to the touch. I turned it and the door clicked open. It swung inwards, just like the front door, revealing more darkness. This room was even darker than the reception area. The flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed up by the gloom, barely penetrating the shadows. I stepped inside, my senses on high alert, every nerve ending screaming at me to turn around and run. The room was an office, clearly. I could make out the shapes of a desk, a chair, bookshelves lining one wall. Everything was shrouded in shadow, draped in dust. The air here was even colder, and the metallic sweet smell was stronger, almost sickeningly so. "Mr. Abernathy." I called again, my voice barely a whisper this time. "Are you here?" Silence. But not just silence, something else. A feeling, like I wasn't alone, like something was in the room with me, watching me from the shadows. Something unseen, something not human. A shiver ran down my spine despite the oppressive humidity. I wanted to get out of this office, out of this building, back into the relative normalcy of the Kentucky night. But I had a job to do, and corporate fixers don't run away from dark offices, no matter how creepy they feel. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to move further into the room, sweeping the flashlight beam around. The desk was large, made of dark wood, cluttered with papers and files buried under inches of dust. The chair behind it was empty, pushed back as if someone had just gotten up and left. The bookshelves were crammed with books. Not business manuals or agricultural guides like I expected, but old leather-bound volumes with titles I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Titles that seemed strange, ominous. As I moved closer to the desk, my foot bumped against something on the floor. I pointed the flashlight down, and recoiled. Lying on the dusty wooden floor, half hidden under the edge of the desk, was a doll, but not a child's toy. This was different. It was made of rough, unpainted wood, crudely carved into a vaguely humanoid shape. Its limbs were stiff, awkwardly jointed. Its face was blank, featureless, except for 2 holes gouged out for eyes. And it was covered in something dark, something that looked like dried blood. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. This was deeply, profoundly disturbing. I bent down hesitantly and picked up the doll. It was heavier than it looked, cold and strangely clammy. The dark substance on its surface was sticky, almost tacky to the touch. It definitely smelled like a blood. Old, dried blood. My hand trembled as I held the doll up to the flashlight beam, examining it more closely. The wood was rough, splintered in places. There were strange markings carved into its body, lines and symbols that I didn't recognize. They looked ancient, primal. And then I noticed something else. Something even more disturbing. Tied around the doll's neck, with a piece of frayed twine, was a small, folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, I untied the twine and unfolded the paper. It was yellowed, brittle, and covered in faded handwriting. Handwriting that looked shaky. Whenever almost frantic, I held the paper closer to the flashlight, squinting to make out the words in the dim light. The handwriting was cramped, spidery, and difficult to read, but slowly, painstakingly, I began to decipher the message. It was a single sentence, scrawled in looping, uneven letters, a sentence that made my blood run cold, a sentence that echoed in the oppressive silence of the office, chilling me to the bone. The sentence read, "He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake." The thrumming in the building seemed to intensify, vibrating through the floor, up my legs, into my chest. The air grew colder, heavier. The metallic sweet smell became almost unbearable, making my head spin. I dropped a door as if it had burned me, the wooden figure clattering onto the dusty floor. My breath came in ragged gasps. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me, paralyzing me. "He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awakey." The words echoed in my mind, repeating themselves over and over. A childish rhyme, twisted into something sinister, something terrifying, a warning threat, or just the ramblings of a madman. I didn't know. And I didn't want to find out. I backed away from the desk, stumbling blindly towards the door. I had to get out of this office, out of this building, away from the darkness, the silence, the smell, the door. As I reached the doorway, I glanced back, one last terrified look at the office. The flashlight beam danced across the room, illuminating the desk, the bookshelves, the dusty floor, and the doll. It was still lying there, on the floor, where I had dropped it, but something was different. Had it moved? I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that the shadows were playing tricks on my eyes. That fear was making me see things that weren't there. But no, it had moved, just slightly, but definitely. The doll was no longer lying flat on the floor. It was propped up, leaning against the leg of the desk, as if it was sitting up, watching me. And as I stared, frozen in terror, at the crudely carved wooden figure, I saw something else. Something that made my blood run colder than ice. In the gouged-out holes that served as its eyes, in the blank, featureless face of the wooden doll, I saw movement. A flicker of something, deep within the darkness of the eye sockets. A flicker of light. Or was it light? Or something else? Something alive. Something watching. And then, in the oppressive silence of the office, I heard it. A sound, faint at first, barely audible, but growing louder, closer with each passing second. A sound that made my skin crawl. A sound that sent shivers of pure, primal fear down my spine. A sound that I knew, instinctively, was not human. A sound of breathing. Slow, raspy, uneven breathing. Like something monstrous was drawing breath in the darkness, breathing and watching me. The breathing was coming from behind me, from the hallway, beyond the reception area, from the darkness that stretched out into the unknown depths of the building. I didn't wait to see what was breathing. I didn't wait to find out what was watching. I didn't wait for anything. I turned and ran. I ran like I had never run before. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, fear lending wings to my feet. I ran out of the office, out of the reception area, out of the building, stumbling blindly into the cool Kentucky night. I didn't stop running until I reached the silver sedan, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine, the roar of the motor a welcome sound in the oppressive silence. I threw the car into reverse, backing out of the gravel parking lot, tires spitting stones, and didn't stop until I was back on the county road, heading north, away from that place. Away from the darkness, the smell, the door, the breathing, the watching. I drove for miles, not stopping, not slowing down, not even looking in the rearview mirror. I drove until I reached the state road, then the interstate, then the blessed lights of civilization, until I found a motel, a generically lit chain motel, with a neon sign that hummed reassuringly in the night. I checked in, practically collapsing into the sterile, overly air-conditioned room, locking and bolting the door behind me. I didn't turn off the lights. I didn't close the curtains. I just sat on the edge of the bed, heart still pounding, breath still ragged, staring blankly at the wall. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awakey. The words still echoed in my mind, the image of the wooden doll, sitting up, watching me with its empty eye sockets burned into my brain. The smell of dust and blood and something sickly sweet still clung to my nostrils. The sound of that slow, raspy breathing still echoed in my ears. I didn't know what I had seen in that office. I didn't know what was in that building. I didn't know what was waiting for me back there, in the darkness of rural Kentucky. But one thing I knew for sure, I wasn't going back, not for anything. My turnaround project in Covington, Kentucky, it was over, before it even began. Some branches are just too far gone to be fixed. Some messes are just too dark. I spent the rest of the night in that motel room, lights blazing, door locked, curtains open, staring out at the empty parking lot, waiting for the dawn. Waiting for the sun to rise and burn away the darkness, both outside and inside my mind. And as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gold, I made a decision. I was calling corporate. First thing in the morning. Telling them I was sick. Family emergency. Anything to get me out of Kentucky. Anything to keep me from ever having to go back to that place. Because deep down, in the cold, dark pit of my stomach, I knew one thing. Whatever was in that building, whatever was watching me from the shadows, it wasn't just in Covington, Kentucky. It was everywhere. And it was always watching. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake if. The rhyme echoed in the dawning light, a chilling whisper in the morning air. And I knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that it was true. He was watching, and he would keep watching, no matter where I went, no matter what I did. He would always be watching. The motel coffee was atrocious, bitter and thin, tasting vaguely of burnt plastic. But I drank it anyway, scalding my tongue and throat, desperate for anything to cut through the lingering chill that had settled deep within me. Dawn had broken, painting the sky in softer, less menacing hues than the sunset, but the Kentucky countryside outside the window still looked wrong. Subdued, perhaps, but still holding that undercurrent of something ancient and unsettling. I'd managed a few hours of fitful, dream-haunted sleep, punctuated by jolts of waking terror. Every creak of the motel room, every passing car, every rustle of leaves outside the window had sent my heart leaping into my throat. The image of the doll, those empty eye sockets, the feeling of being watched, it was all still too vivid, too real. As promised, first thing in the morning, I called corporate. My boss, a brisk, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies, answered on the third ring. "Hayes," she said, her voice sharp and impatient. "Report." "Ms. Davies." I began trying to sound professional, trying to ignore the tremor in my voice. "I'm calling from near Covington. There's been an unforeseen issue. Her voice sharpened further. "What kind of issue, Hayes? Did you even make it to the branch office?" "Yes, ma'am, I did. But I'm not feeling well. Sudden onset. Think it's flu, like symptoms. Very sudden. Lame, I knew, but it was the best I could come up with on short notice. My mind was still a scrambled mess of fear and adrenaline. A flu? Hayes, you were cleared for this assignment. We don't send people out if they're sick." "I know, ma'am." It came on suddenly. Last night, chills, the works. I don't think I'll be able to perform effectively. In my current condition. God, I sounded like an idiot. But I couldn't bring myself to explain what had really happened. How could I tell her about the darkness, the doll, the breathing, the feeling of being watched? She'd think I'd finally cracked under the pressure. And maybe I had. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear Miss Davies' mental gears grinding. I knew she hated delays, hated complications, but I also knew she valued results, and a sick project manager was no use to anyone. "All right, Hayes," she said finally, her voice softening, just a fraction. "Get yourself checked out by a doctor. Email me a medical certificate. We'll reassess. In the meantime, stay put. Don't try to be a hero." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, Ms. Davies." Relief flooded through me, so potent it almost made me weak. I was off the hook, for now at least. "And Hayes," she added, just as I was about to hang up, "this isn't going to become a pattern, is it? We need you back in fighting shape pronto." "No, ma'am." "Absolutely not. I'll get right on it." I hung up, my hand still trembling slightly. Medical certificate, right? Like I was going to see a doctor in rural Kentucky and explain that I was suffering from a severe case of creepy wooden doll-induced terror. No, thank you. The best medicine for what ailed me was distance. Miles and miles of distance. I checked out of the motel, ignoring the curious look the clerk gave me as I practically sprinted through the lobby. I threw my bag into the silver sedan, jumped behind the wheel, and pointed the car north. Towards Cincinnati, towards the airport, towards anywhere but here. The drive back was different. In the daylight, the Kentucky countryside was still rural, still a little off, but it lacked the oppressive menace of the previous night. The trees no longer seemed to lean in, the shadows no longer writhed with unseen horrors. The air still smelled earthy sweet, but the metallic undertone was fainter, almost non-existent. Sunlight, I realized, was a powerful disinfectant. It didn't erase what had happened, but it bleached away some of the fear, some of the raw, primal terror. Rationality began to creep back into my mind, like hesitant tendrils of ivy reclaiming a ruined wall. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it was just stress. Burnout, too many turnaround projects, too many late nights, too much bad coffee. Maybe the isolation of the rural setting, the darkness, the silence, had just gotten to me. Made me jumpy, paranoid. The door was undeniably creepy. But it was just a door, right? A weird old, blood-stained door. Probably some local folk art thing. Or maybe it was just some kind of prank. A bizarre attempt at office humor gone horribly wrong. Abernathy was probably laughing his head off right now, watching me freak out on security cameras. Assuming there were security cameras in that place. And the note. The nursery rhyme. Probably just some edgy decoration to add atmosphere. Yeah, that had to be it. A misguided attempt at creating a unique office environment. Some people were just weird. The breathing. The feeling of being watched. Hallucinations. Pure and simple. Stress-induced hallucinations. My mind playing tricks on me. It happened. Especially when you were tired, stressed, and alone in the dark. It was all perfectly rational. Perfectly explainable. There was no monster in the shadows. No ancient evil lurking in the Kentucky countryside. Just a creepy office, a weird doll, and an overactive imagination, right? But even as I tried to convince myself of this, a cold knot of doubt remained in my stomach. The fear, though dulled by daylight and distance, still lingered. The memory of those empty eye sockets, the feeling of being watched, the sound of that breathing, they were too vivid, too visceral to be easily dismissed as mere hallucinations. And the rhymey, he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awaker. It wasn't just edgy decoration. It was targeted, personal, like it was meant for me. Like someone, or something, knew I was coming, knew I would find that doll, knew I would read that note. The more I thought about it, the less rational the prank theory seemed. Who would go to such elaborate, disturbing lengths just to what? Scare the new project manager, and why? What was the point? It made no sense. Unless it wasn't a prank. Unless it was something else entirely, something intentional, something malevolent. I shook my head, trying to clear the dark thoughts. No, I was letting my imagination run away with me. I needed to focus on getting out of Kentucky, getting back to civilization, getting back to normal. I reached the outskirts of Cincinnati, the familiar sprawl of fast food restaurants and gas stations a welcome sight. The city air, even with its metallic tang, felt cleaner, safer than the heavy, earthy air of rural Kentucky. I pulled into a brightly lit gas station, needing coffee, needing to be around other people, even if they were just harried commuters filling up their tanks. Inside the gas station minimart, the fluorescent lights buzzed reassuringly. The air smelled of stale coffee and microwaved burritos. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager with headphones around his neck, barely glanced up. I paid for my coffee. Normal, ordinary, blessedly, wonderfully normal. As I sipped the lukewarm coffee, scrolling through news headlines on my phone, trying to distract myself, I noticed a flyer tacked to the bulletin board by the door. A faded, yellowed flyer, just like the ones in the Agri Corp Solutions reception area. My stomach clenched. I hesitated for a moment, then forced myself to walk over to the bulletin board. It was probably just some local event, a church bake sale or a county fair, nothing to be afraid of, just a flyer. But as I got closer, I saw the headline scrawled in large, uneven letters across the top of the flyer. Letters that looked familiar. Letters that sent a fresh wave of cold dread washing over me. The headline read Covi tum humiti ein NL Havers Festival. Below the headline, in smaller print, was more information about the festival dates, times, activities, etc. But my eyes were fixed on the headline, on the word Covington, and on the logo printed next to it. A crude, hand-drawn image. An image that made my breath catch in my throat, my skin crawl. An image that I recognized instantly, with a sickening lurch of recognition. It was a drawing of a doll. A crudely carved wooden doll with stiff, awkward limbs, a blank, featureless face, and 2 gout holes for eyes. Just like the doll in Abernathy's office. Just like it. Below the drawing of the doll, in smaller, even more uneven handwriting, was a single sentence. A sentence that echoed the words on the note, the words that had haunted me all night. A sentence that confirmed my worst fears. The sentence read, "He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows. When you're awake, he'd join us for the Harvest Festival." The thrumming started again, Faint at first, but growing stronger, louder, vibrating in my chest, in my bones. The fluorescent lights of the minimart seemed to flicker, the air grew colder, and the smell of stale coffee was replaced by that familiar, sickeningly sweet metallic scent. I ripped the flyer off the bulletin board, crumpling it in my fist, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I had to get out of here. Out of the gas station, out of Cincinnati, out of whatever this was. I stumbled back to the silver sedan, practically falling into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut, locking it, starting the engine. I threw the car into drive, peeling out of the gas station parking lot, tires squealing, leaving skid marks on the asphalt. I drove blindly, aimlessly, just wanting to get away, to escape. I didn't know where I was going, I didn't care. Just away. Away from Covington, away from Kentucky, away from the doll, away from the rhyme, away from him. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're wakey. The rhyme was everywhere now. Not just in my mind, but out there. In the world. On flyers in gas stations. On where else? How far did it spread? How many people knew? How many people were involved? And who was he? What was E? The breathing in the darkness, the watcher in the shadows, the thing that animated the wooden doll. My thoughts raced, spiraling into a vortex of fear and paranoia. I was losing it. I knew I was. This was insane. Dolls, rhymes, hallucinations. Flyers, it was all too much, too weird, too creepy. I needed to stop. I needed to calm down. I needed to think rationally. But rationality seemed to be slipping away from me, like sand through my fingers. Fear was taking over, consuming me, driving me. I pulled off the highway, onto a quiet side road, needing to stop, needing to breathe, needing to think. I parked the silver sedan by the side of the road, killed the engine, and just sat there, slumped over the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath, trying to regain control. The engine ticked as it cooled down. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the trees lining the road. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the interior of the car in shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was peaceful, almost serene. Maybe I was safe here. Maybe if I just stayed still, stayed quiet, stayed calm, it would all go away. The fear, the paranoia, the creepy. Maybe it was all just in my head. Maybe it would fade like a bad dream if I just ignored it. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to focus on the peaceful sounds of the countryside. The rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the distant drone of a tractor in a field somewhere. Normal, safe sounds. Slowly, gradually, my heart rate began to slow down. My breathing became more even. The knot of fear in my stomach loosened, just a little. Maybe it was working. Maybe I could just outwait it, outlast it. Maybe. If I just stayed here long enough, the creepy would dissipate. I sat there for a long time, eyes closed, listening to the sounds of the countryside, trying to banish the images from my mind, trying to convince myself that it was all just a bad dream. And for a while, it seemed to work. The fear receded, the paranoia subsided, the creepy faded. I began to feel almost normal, almost safe. But then, slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly, the sounds of the countryside began to change. The rustling leaves seemed to grow louder, more insistent, like whispering voices. The chirping birds became harsher, more frantic, like warning cries. The distant drone of the tractor faded away, replaced by something else. A new sound, a sound that started faint, barely audible, but grew steadily louder, closer, with each passing second. A sound that made my blood run cold, my skin crawl. A sound that I recognized instantly, with a sickening lurch of dread. A sound of breathing, slow, raspy, uneven breathing, much closer, right outside the car. Breathing and watching. I opened my eyes, my heart leaping into my throat, fear flooding back, stronger than ever. The peaceful sunlight filtering through the leaves now seemed menacing. The dappled patterns of light and shadow on the dashboard seemed to writhe, to twist, to take on shapes. I looked around, frantically searching for the source of the breathing, but I saw nothing. Just the trees, the road, the fields stretching out into the distance. Nothing moving. Nothing visible, but the breathing was there. I could hear it, feel it. A low, rhythmic thrumming, vibrating in the air in the car, in my chest. Closer, and then I saw it, in the rearview mirror. At first, it was just a blur, a flicker of movement in the shadows beneath the trees, at the edge of the road. Something dark, indistinct, just at the periphery of my vision. But as I stared, frozen in terror, at the rearview mirror, the blur became clearer, sharper, more defined. It moved out of the shadows, into the sunlight, onto the road. And I saw what it was. It was a figure, tall, gaunt, vaguely humanoid in shape, dressed in dark, shapeless clothing that seemed to blend into the shadows. Its face was hidden, obscured by shadow or something else. Something missing. And it was walking towards me, slowly, deliberately, relentlessly. Walking down the side of the road, towards the silver sedan, towards me, with that slow, raspy, and even breathing echoing in the air, growing louder with each step. I couldn't see its face, but I knew. I knew with a certainty that went beyond sight, beyond reason, beyond logic. It was him. The one from the rhyme. The one who sees you when you're sleeping, who knows when you're awake. The one who was watching me. The one who was breathing in the darkness. He was coming for me. And there was nowhere left to run. Time seemed to warp, stretching and distorting, as I stared into the rearview mirror. The figure in the road was still approaching, that slow, deliberate walk, each step eating up the distance between us with agonizing inevitability. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but my body remained frozen, locked in place by a terror so profound it felt physical, like lead weights strapped to my limbs. He was still too far away to make out details, but the overall impression was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just the dark, shapeless clothing or the obscured face. It was the way it moved, that unnatural, gliding gait, as if it wasn't quite walking, not in the way a human walks. And the breathing, that rasping, uneven sound, growing louder, closer, filling the car, filling my head. Panic finally broke through the paralysis. My hand scrabbled at the steering wheel, fumbling for the ignition. Keys. Where were the keys? My pockets. The console. My mind was a blank slate of terror, incapable of coherent thought. I finally located the keys, dangling from the ignition, right where I'd left them. Idiot. My fingers trembled so badly I could barely grip the plastic fob. I twisted the key, the engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life, a blessed sound in the encroaching silence. But even as the engine turned over, I knew it was too late. The figure was closer now, much closer. Just a few yards away, still walking, still coming. I could see it more clearly now in the rearview mirror, in my peripheral vision. Tall, impossibly tall. Its head almost touching the low, hanging branches of the trees lining the road. Its form was gaunt, skeletal, the dark clothing hanging loose on what looked like a frame of bone and shadow. And the face, or rather, the lack of a face. It wasn't just obscured by shadow. It was featureless, blank. A smooth, pale expanse where a face should have been, devoid of eyes, nose, mouth. Just nothing. A void, except not entirely a void. Deep within that featureless expanse, in the place where eyes should have been, I saw it again. That flicker of something. Faint, ephemeral, but undeniably there. A flicker of light or darkness, or something in between. Something watching. He was right behind me now. I could feel it, a cold presence at my back, pressing in on me, suffocating me. The breathing was deafening, a rasping, rattling sound that filled my ears, drowned out the roar of the engine, the frantic hammering of my heart. I slammed the car into reverse, foot flat on the accelerator, tires spitting gravel and dirt. The silver sedan lurched backwards, narrowly missing a tree, careening wildly down the narrow road. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, expecting to see the figure receding, left behind in a cloud of dust and exhaust. But it was still there, still walking, still coming. Impossible, it should have been left behind, swallowed by the distance, outpaced by the car. But it was still there, keeping pace with me, that relentless, unnatural walk, that chilling, unwavering approach. Fear gave way to a desperate, primal surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just creepy anymore. This wasn't just a hallucination. This was real. This was happening, and whatever it was is hunting me. I yanked the steering wheel, throwing the car into a violent U-turn, tires screaming in protest, the sedan fishtailing wildly across the road. I slammed it into drive, accelerating forward, back the way I had come, away from him. I floored it, the engine straining, the speedometer needle climbing. The trees blurred past in a green and brown streak. The wind roared in my ears, the car vibrated violently. I was going as fast as I dared on the narrow, winding road, pushing the sensible silver sedan to its absolute limit. But even at that speed, even with the engine screaming, even with the tires protesting, faintly now, but still there. That slow, raspy, uneven breathing, still behind me, still following, still coming. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, my heart sinking like a stone. It was still there. Further back now, yes, but still there. Still walking, that relentless, unnatural gait, that unwavering pursuit. It was keeping pace with the car, somehow effortlessly, closing the distance, slowly but surely. It was gaining on me. Despair began to creep in, cold and insidious, alongside the terror. There was no escape. No matter how fast I drove, no matter which way I turned, no matter what I did, it would still be there, behind me, following, hunting. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. The rhyme echoed in my mind, no longer just a creepy nursery rhyme, but a chilling, inescapable truth. He did see me. He did know. He knew where I was, he knew what I was doing, he knew where I was going. And he was coming for me. I had to try something else. Driving wasn't working. Running wasn't working. What else was there? Fight? Could I fight that tall, gaunt, featureless figure, that breathing darkness, madness, suicide? But what choice did I have? If I kept running, it would eventually catch me. It was faster, stronger, more relentless than anything I had ever encountered. It was supernatural, unstoppable. Maybe if I confronted it. Maybe if I stopped running, turned around, faced it, maybe then, just maybe, I could understand what it wanted. Maybe I could reason with it. Maybe I could appease it. A foolish hope, I knew, but it was all I had left. Desperate times, desperate measures. Anything was better than this endless, futile flight. I slowed the car, foot easing off the accelerator, the engine noise gradually fading. The breathing grew louder again, closer, filling the silence. I pulled the silver sedan to the side of the road, put it in park, and killed the engine. Silence descended, heavy, oppressive, broken only by the rasping, uneven breathing, now deafeningly close. I could feel it, a cold presence right outside the car, pressing against the windows, against the doors, against my very skin. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, unlocking the door, pushing it open. The cool Kentucky air rushed in, carrying with it that familiar, sickeningly sweet, metallic scent, and the sound of that breathing. Now right beside me, just inches away, I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and turned to face of him. He was there, standing right beside the car, just a few feet away. Taller than I had imagined, towering over me, blotting out the sunlight. The dark, shapeless clothing seemed to radiate shift in the dappled light, like shadows given form. The featureless face, that pale, smooth expanse, was turned towards me, those empty eye sockets watching. And in those eye sockets, that flicker, not light, not darkness, but something else. Something alive, something ancient, something hungry. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt them. Burning into me, probing me, seeing into my soul, stripping me bare. It was an invasion, a violation, a psychic rape. I felt exposed, vulnerable, utterly helpless. The breathing continued, slow, raspy, uneven, each breath a rattling exhalation of something cold and dead. The metallic, sweet smell was overpowering now, making my head spin, my stomach churn. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, to break the oppressive silence, to break the terrifying spell. But my voice was gone, choked off by fear. My throat was dry, my tongue felt like lead. I could only stand there, frozen, staring up at that featureless face, those empty eye sockets, feeling that cold, relentless gaze. He just stood there, too, motionless, silent breathing. Watching, waiting, the silence stretched out, agonizingly, punctuated only by the rasping breaths and the frantic pounding of my heart. I had to do something. Anything, even if it was futile. Even if it was foolish, even if it was suicidal. I couldn't just stand there and wait for whatever was going to happen. My eyes darted around, searching for something, anything, to use as a weapon, a rock, a stick, anything to defend myself, to fight back, to break free from this paralyzing terror. My gaze fell on the silver sedan, the car. It was all I had. Pathetic, I knew, but it was better than nothing. Maybe if I could use it to distract it, to ram it, to something. It was a desperate plan, a fool's errand, but desperation was all I had left. Adrenaline surged again, overriding the fear, replacing paralysis with a frantic, reckless energy. I lunged back into the car, slamming the door shut, locking again, fumbling for the ignition. K's. Still there. Thank God. I twisted the key, the engine roared to life again, louder this time, more defiant. I slammed the car into drive, foot flat on the accelerator, aiming the silver sedan directly at the figure standing beside the road. This was it. My last, desperate gamble. Fight I had chosen, fight. Suicidal, futile, insane fight. The car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, accelerating towards the figure. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes fixed on that tall, dark shape, that featureless face, those empty eye sockets. He didn't move. He just stood there, motionless, silent, breathing, watching the silver sedan hurtling towards him like a predator watching its prey. No fear, no surprise, no reaction at all, just waiting. Closer, the car was almost upon him now. I could see the details of his dark clothing, the gaunt skeletal frame beneath, the smooth, pale expanse of his face, those flickering eyes, impact. The car slammed into him with a sickening thud, metal crunching, glass shattering, the force of the collision throwing me forward against the seatbelt, snapping my head back. The world exploded in a chaos and motion, metal screaming, glass flying, airbags deploying in a white cloud of powder, and then silence, deafening, absolute silence. The engine stalled, the car shuddered to a halt, the airbags deflated with a soft hiss. The only sound was the ringing in my ears and my own ragged breathing. I was alive. I was okay. Bruised, shaken, disoriented, but alive. I had hit him. I had actually hit him with the car. Maybe I had hurt him. Maybe I had stopped him. Maybe I had even defeated him. Hope flickered, fragile but persistent, in the darkness of my mind. Maybe it wasn't unstoppable after all. Maybe it was vulnerable. Maybe I had a chance. Cautiously, hesitantly, I reached for the seatbelt release, unclipping it, pushing the deflated airbag aside. My body ached, my head throbbed, but adrenaline still coursed through my veins, keeping me going, keeping me fighting. I pushed open the car door, wincing as shards of glass crunched under my feet. I stepped out of the wreckage into the silence, into the sunlight, and looked around. The silver sedan was a mess. The front end was crumpled. The windshield shattered, the hood buckled, the headlights smashed. Definitely totaled. But where was he? I scanned the road, the trees, the fields, searching for any sign of the figure, but he was gone, vanished, disappeared, as if he had never been there at all. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me collapse. I had done it. I had survived. I had escaped. I had won. Against all reason, against all hope. I had actually won. I laughed, a shaky, hysterical sound, relief and disbelief bubbling up inside me. I was alive. I was free. The nightmare was over. But even as I laughed, even as relief flooded through me, a cold tendril of doubt snaked its way into my heart. It was too easy, too sudden, too convenient. He had just vanished, after being hit by a car. No struggle, no resistance, no trace, just gone. It didn't make sense. It wasn't believable. And then I saw it. On the hood of the wrecked silver sedan, a small, dark object lying amidst the crumpled metal and shattered glass. Something that hadn't been there before. Something that made my laughter die in my throat, my relief turned to ice-cold dread. It was a door. The wooden door. The crudely carved, blood-stained door from Abernathy's office. The door from the flyer. His door. It was lying on the hood of the car, perfectly intact, untouched by the collision, as if it had been gently placed there, after the impact. As if it had appeared. And it was facing me. Sitting upright on the crumpled hood, propped up against the shattered windshield, its blank, featureless face turned directly towards me. Those empty eye sockets watching. And in those eye sockets, that flicker was brighter now, stronger, more intense. No longer just a faint, ephemeral glimmer, but a clear, distinct light. A cold, malevolent light, burning in the darkness of those empty sockets. And then I heard it again. Not just the breathing this time, but something else, faint. A new sound, barely audible, but growing louder, closer, with each passing second. A sound that made my blood run colder than ice, my soul recoil in horror. A sound of laughter. Slow, rasping, uneven laughter. Just like the breathing, but different, more chilling, more sinister, more knowing. Laughter that echoed in the silence of the Kentucky countryside. Laughter that filled my ears. Laughter that resonated in my bones. Laughter that seemed to come from everywhere. From the trees, from the fields, from the sky, from the very air itself. Laughter that was directed at me. Laughter that said, without words, without sound, without anything but pure, unadulterated malice, "You thought you could escape. You thought you could defeat me. You thought it was over. Fool. It's never over. I see you when you're sleeping. I know when you're awake." The laughter grew louder, more manic, more terrifying. The light in the doll's eye sockets burned brighter, colder, more malevolent. The metallic sweet smell became overwhelming, suffocating, making me gag. And then, in the midst of the laughter, in the heart of the horror, I saw something else. Something that made my blood freeze, my mind shatter, my sanity unravel. On the smooth, pale expanse of the doll's featureless face, right below those burning eye sockets, a line began to appear. Faint at first, barely visible, but growing darker, sharper, more defined with each echoing laugh. A line that curved and twisted, forming a shape that I recognized instantly, with a sickening lurch of recognition. A shape that made my soul scream in silent terror. A mouth. A mouth was forming on the doll's featureless face. A crude, jagged, horrifying mouth, carved into the pale wood, opening in a silent, mocking grin. a grin that stretched wider and wider with each echoing laugh, revealing rows of sharp, splintered teeth. And as the mouth opened, as the grin widened, as the laughter reached a crescendo of pure, unadulterated evil, the doll spoke. Its voice was like the breathing, slow, raspy, uneven, but now articulate, formed into words, words that echoed the rhyme, words that confirmed my deepest, darkest fears, words that shattered the last vestiges of my sanity. The doll spoke, its newly formed wooden mouth opening and closing with each rasping syllable, its cold, malevolent light burning into me. And in the silence of the Kentucky countryside, in the wreckage of the silver sedan, in the heart of my own personal nightmare, I heard the words, clear as a bell, chilling me to the very core of my being. The doll spoke, and it said, "Gotcha." The word hung in the air, heavy and final, echoing with rasping laughter that seemed to claw at my sanity. The doll grinned, that newly formed, jagged mouth a grotesque mockery of human expression. The light in its eye sockets burned, intensified, feeling like twin needles piercing my soul. Gotcha. Just one word, but it shattered everything. Hope, relief, the fragile remnants of rationality, all gone, pulverized by that single, chilling syllable. There was no escape. There was no victory. There was only capture, consumption. Whatever twisted fate he had in store for me. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there, paralyzed by terror, staring at that grinning door. But my body refused to obey. Fear had become a cage, trapping me, suffocating me, leaving me utterly helpless. The laughter subsided, fading into a low, guttural chuckle that rumbled through the air, vibrating in my chest. The door remained grinning, watching, that cold, malevolent light unwavering. The metallic, sweet smell intensified, becoming cloying, sickening, making my vision swim. And then, slowly, deliberately, the doll began to move. Not just a flicker, not just a shift in position, but actual, purposeful movement. The stiff, wooden limbs began to twitch, to bend, to articulate. The crudely carved body began to animate. It unfolded itself from its seated position on the hood of the wrecked car, those jerky, unnatural movements somehow even more disturbing than stillness. It stood upright, impossibly tall, towering over the wreckage, over me, its wooden head cocked slightly to one side, as if studying me, assessing me, savoring my terror. The laughter started again, low and slow at first, then building in intensity, rising to a crescendo of manic glee. The doll took a step, then another, those stiff wooden feet making a soft, scraping sound on the crumpled metal of the hood. It was moving towards me, walking towards me, hunting me here, even now, even after the crash, even after everything. Escape was impossible, fight was futile. There was only one option left. Acceptance, surrender, letting whatever was going to happen happen. Maybe, just maybe, if I stopped resisting, if I stopped running, if I just gave in, it would be quicker, less painful, less terrifying. But even as the thought formed in my mind, a tiny spark of defiance flickered within me. No, I wouldn't surrender. Not yet. Not without a fight. Even if it was a hopeless fight, even if it was a losing battle, I would not go down without resistance. I would not let it have me easily. Adrenaline surged again, a final, desperate wave, washing away the paralysis, replacing fear with a cold, reckless resolve. My eyes darted around, searching for anything at all, that could be used as a weapon, as a distraction, as a means of escape. My gaze fell on the wreckage of the silver sedan. Metal, glass, plastic useless. But then, I saw it. Spilled gasoline on asphalt, leak, shimmer of the ruptured fuel tank pooling around the wreckage. Gasoline, flammable, combustible. Fire. 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 Maybe fire could hurt it. Maybe fire could stop it. Maybe fire could destroy it. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance I had left. My hand trembled as I reached into my pocket, fumbling for my lighter. My fingers closed around the cold metal, the familiar way to small comfort in the overwhelming terror. I flicked the flint, the wheel spinning, sparks flying, but nothing. Damn it. The lighter was out of fluid. Empty, useless. Despair threatened to engulf me again, but I fought it back, forcing myself to think, to focus, to find another. I needed fire. How? Where? My eyes scanned the wreckage again, desperately searching, frantically hoping then. I saw it. The car battery exposed, wires sparking, still connected, still live. Electricity. Ignition. It was insane. Suicidal, but it was my only chance, and I was out of options. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself, I reached for the exposed battery terminals, ignoring the frantic warnings screaming in my brain. Electricity was dangerous. Electricity could kill me. But what choice did I have? Death by fire, or death by that? Fire seemed almost preferable. My fingers brushed against the metal terminals, a jolt of static electricity snapping in the air. Not enough. I needed a spark, a real spark. Something to ignite the gasoline fumes. I ripped a loose wire from the dashboard, tearing it free from its moorings, ignoring the sharp edges of broken plastic cutting into my skin. The wire was frayed, copper strands exposed at the end. Perfect. With trembling hands, I brought the frayed wire to the battery terminals, touching them together, completing the circuit. A shower of sparks erupted, bright and hot, snapping and crackling in the air. The smell of ozone filled my nostrils, and then ignition. A whoosh of flame erupted from the spilled gasoline, licking across the asphalt, spreading rapidly, hungrily, engulfing the wreckage of the silver sedan in a sudden inferno. Flames roared upwards, orange and yellow, reaching for the sky, casting flickering shadows, throwing heat against my face. The door recoiled, stepping back from the flames, that malevolent light in its eye sockets flickering, dimming, as if recoiling from the heat, from the fire. The latte faltered, choked off, replaced by a hiss, an angry sound, like air escaping from a punctured lung. Fire was working. Fire was hurting it. Fire was stopping it. Maybe fire could kill it. Maybe fire could save me. Hope surged stronger this time, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. I had a chance. A real chance. I wasn't beaten yet. I wasn't captured yet. I could still fight. I could still escape. I grabbed a burning piece of debris from the wreckage, a jagged shard of flaming plastic, brandishing it like a torch, holding it out in front of me towards the door. The flames danced and crackled, casting grotesque shadows on the featureless face, those empty eye sockets. "Stay back," I yelled, my voice hoarse, ragged, barely audible above the roar of the flames. "Stay away from me! I'm not afraid of you! All lies!" I was terrified. More terrified than I'd ever been in my life. But I couldn't let it see my fear. I had to be strong. I had to be brave. I had to fight. The door just stood there, motionless, silent, watching me. That malevolent light flickering in its eye sockets. The laughter was gone now, replaced by that angry hiss, that frustrated rasp. It seemed hesitant, uncertain, as if fire was something it didn't understand, something it couldn't control, something it feared. Good. Fear. Let it hesitate. Let it be uncertain. It was my only advantage, my only weapon. Fire. I took a step forward, brandishing the flaming plastic shard, pushing the flames closer to the door. It recalled again, stepping further back, that hiss growing louder, more agitated. The light in its eye sockets dimmed further, almost extinguished. "Jet back." I yelled again, my voice stronger this time, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate surge of hope. "Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Leave me alone." I advanced again, pushing the flames closer, forcing the door to retreat, step by step, back into the shadows beneath the trees. Away from the burning wreckage, away from me. The hiss grew fainter as it retreated, the light in its eye sockets dimming, fading, until finally it was gone. Vanished, swallowed by the shadows, extinguished, leaving only silent smoke and the roaring flames of the burning car. I stood there, panting, trembling, clutching the flaming plastic shard, watching the shadows beneath the trees, waiting for it to reappear, for it to attack again. But nothing. Silence. Only the crackling of the fire, the whisper of the wind, the frantic pounding of my heart. It was gone. I had done it. I had driven it away. I had survived. I had won. Again. But this time, the relief was different. Subdued. Cautious, not the wild, hysterical joy of before, but a quiet, wary sense of survival. I had escaped, yes, but at what cost? And for how long? The fire wouldn't last forever. The door would be back. I knew it. It was just waiting. Regrouping. It wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. If the rhyme echoed in my mind. No longer a threat, but a grim, inescapable reality. It was true. He did see me. He did know, and he would keep watching. No matter where I went, no matter what I did. The victory was temporary. The escape was fleeting. The nightmare was far from over. It had just paused. Respite, not resolution. I dropped the flaming plastic shard, letting it fall to the asphalt, the flames sputtering and dying as it hit the ground. The fire still roared, consuming the silver sedan, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky, but the shadows beneath the trees were silent, empty. For now. I turned away from the burning wreckage, away from the silent shadows, and started to walk. I didn't know where I was going, I didn't care. Just away. Away from Kentucky, away from Covington, away from the doll, away from the rhyme, away from him. I walked for a long time, along the side of the road, not looking back, not stopping, not slowing down. The sun climbed higher in the sky, The day grew warmer, the sounds of the countryside returned, birds chirping, insects buzzing, life continuing, as if nothing had happened, as if there wasn't a monster lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting, breathing. Eventually I reached a small town, a cluster of houses and businesses huddled together by the side of the road, civilization. Of a sort. Not the bright, sterile normalcy of the motel, but something closer to it. Something safer, maybe. I found a gas station, this one still functional, still brightly lit, still reassuringly ordinary. I went inside, bought a bottle of water, a candy bar, and a bus ticket to anywhere. Anywhere that wasn't Kentucky. Anywhere that was far, far away from him. The bus arrived an hour later, a Greyhound, heading north towards Ohio, maybe Pennsylvania. I didn't care. Just north, just away. I climbed aboard, found a window seat, and stared out at the passing landscape, watching the Kentucky countryside recede into the distance, disappearing behind me, swallowed by the horizon. As the bus pulled away, as the town faded from view, as Kentucky became just another memory, I glanced back, one last time in the side mirror. Just a fleeting glimpse, just a quick, involuntary check, but it was enough. In the distance, at the edge of the road, just beyond the town limits, at the edge of the shadows beneath the trees, I saw it. A figure, tall, gaunt, dark, standing motionless, silent, watching the bus pull away, watching me leave, that featureless face turned in my direction, those empty eye sockets burning. And in those eye sockets, that light, no longer dim, no longer flickering, but burning bright, burning cold, burning malevolent, burning with an unwavering, inescapable intensity. He was still watching. He would always be watching. No matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, no matter what I did, he would always be there, watching, breathing, grinning, laughing, knowing. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. The rhyme echoed in my mind, not just a whisper now, but a roar, a scream, an inescapable truth. And as the bus sped north, leaving Kentucky behind, leaving the burning wreckage, leaving the silent shadows, leaving him behind, I knew with a certainty that went beyond fear, beyond reason, beyond hope, that it wasn't over, it was never over. He was everywhere, and he was always watching. Gotcha.